Hello, we're here to talk about how to break down a large problem into a workable app for our Technovation project. So, what my team and I have decided is that our problem statement is that diabetes is a worldwide problem affecting millions of people, and those people need help dealing with this disease. So, we've defined our problem, which is actually a pretty huge problem. It's a disease that affects millions of people. We're not going to cure it, but we might be able to help some people that are affected by the disease. So what we need to do is now start to think of, well, how can we help these people? So we want to start generating ideas for our app. Now we're on to the brainstorming part of our process, and this is a very important part of the process. This is where we actually generate the ideas for our app. There are a few ground rules for the brainstorming. I'll just go through them quickly. No judgment. There are absolutely no right or wrong ideas. Anything goes at this point. You want to encourage more ideas. The more ideas, the better. One person's idea could spark other ideas within the group. Build on each other's ideas. Think and instead of but. Don't think roadblocks. Think what are the possibilities for this. Stay focused on the topic though. So sometimes you can get off track. So stay focused. Let everyone speak, have their turn speaking, so take turns expressing ideas. Be visual, use a big piece of chart paper, write everything down. You can use pictures, you can use words, whatever works for you. More is better for sure, so go for quantity. We're going to use a mind map for this part of the process. So this is where you take a big piece of paper, like a big piece of chart paper. You're going to write the problem in the middle of the piece of paper. So in this case, we're just going to write the word diabetes with a bubble around it. And then from there, we're going to generate our ideas coming from the main idea. And we're going to draw them in little bubbles. And then each bubble may in turn generate its own set of ideas and branches. So we're going to have kind of from the middle a bunch of branches coming out. Messy is good. This is not something that's published or a finished product. This is just for you and your team to generate ideas. So don't worry about messy. And try to fill the paper. You know, a big piece of chart paper with different colored magic markers is a great way to do this activity. So here's where we do our mind map, diabetes in the middle, bubbles coming out from it, bubbles that relate to each other, we connect up so that we can end up grouping these things together. Let's now try to group some of these bubbles together so that we can generate our main ideas. So you just, take a marker and draw circles around sets of ideas that seem to go together. And generally they're going to be in the same area on the screen or on the paper. But this can give you a general idea of these are our main ideas for the app, and whether or not you want to actually incorporate them. So in this case, we've come up with kind of 5 general areas. So now let's look at each particular feature that we've listed. We've got our 5 ideas, and let's think of it in terms of implementing with App Inventor. How realistic is it? What do we have to learn? So the form idea, great idea where we could share tips and advice with other users. This will require the use of a component called CloudDB, which allows for storing information in the cloud, also, sending information to other people. The difficulty here is just learning CloudDB. So it's definitely doable, but we have to worry about learning how to use CloudDB. Second bullet, medical information. This actually should be pretty easy to implement. So I put that up there as easy to implement because it's just a matter of doing some research, finding out the information, and then putting it into App Inventor. So not too difficult. The daily tracker, where you're tracking medical information, this shouldn't be too tough. You'll be using another component called TinyDB. TinyDB allows you to store information locally on your own device. The thing we have to be concerned about here is how are we going to store it? Let's make sure we really think carefully about storing the information in a way that's going to be easily accessible for the user. Fourth bullet is finding medical help. So in this case, we could start off with a really simple solution, just a list of doctors and hospitals in the area. If we wanted to get a little fancier, we could add a map and the user could search based on location. So we could start off with a simple solution and move on to a harder or more complex solution. And then the fifth one, the medical or medication and pill notification. This could be difficult to implement in App Inventor because App Inventor doesn't have something called background services or background notifications, meaning if you have the app closed on your on your phone, it's not going to pop open like an alarm. So we don't have that possibility, but it still could be implemented, you know, in a different way. So when you open the app, it could look and say, well, what pills are due today, and give you that information. So we shouldn't rule it out, but that's going to be probably the hardest thing to implement given the limitations of App Inventor. So now we have our 5 features that we were interested in implementing. There's a whole bunch of stuff here, so there's a lot to implement. What we need to do now is prioritize them, and so there's different ways to prioritize. You know, what are the important features for our users? So if you're building this for a person or a group of people, what do they really want? What are the more important things? What is easier to implement? So you might want to get some things done that you think you can implement quickly. What are the limitations of the tool we're using, in this case App Inventor? So that might make a difference. So what we're going to do now is to just prioritize these from 1 to 5, given kind of all these different factors. So I'm going to say that I want the medical information to be my #1 priority. It's not that difficult to implement an App Inventor. It will take some time researching what we want to put in there, but I think we can get this accomplished pretty quickly. I'm going to put the forum as #2. Let's say that our users really want that. It's a really interesting, useful feature for our app, so we're going to put that at #2. I'm going to put the tracker at #3. So this is tracking your medical information, another really useful thing for users, not too difficult to implement with App Inventor, so we're going to put that at #3. #4, I'm going to put the finding medical help. We could come up with a simple solution, go for the very complex. So we'll put that down the list as when we're going to implement that. And then I'm putting the last one as the medication and pill notifier. Just because of the limitations of App Inventor, that could be difficult. So I'm going to list these as my priorities. And so we're going to attack these in this order. So we have sketched out a very rudimentary prototype for our app. On the left is screen 1, which we're just going to have a simple 5 buttons vertically showing. And we've decided to work on each of these features one at a time. So the information button is going to be the top one. That's going to take us to a second screen, which will include, at the top, we'll have just our header, but then we'll have general information about diabetes and a paragraph of information. Below that, we're going to have 4 buttons. And I've decided on 4 different topics. These can be expanded upon, but for our first iteration of our app, we're going to have 4. So symptoms, prevention, eating healthy, and type 1 and type 2. And then below that, it's a little home button to go back to home. Okay, so this is kind of messy, but it gets across the idea. So now we can start working on the medical information feature of our app. We are in App Inventor now, and we're going to start making the app. So what I've done is I've started a new project, called it Diabetes Helper. And what we decided was we have kind of 5 ideas or features we want in our app. So we are going to build them one at a time and kind of complete each section. So what we're going to do is on our first screen, we're going to add 5 buttons, and each button will take us to that particular feature. Before we start that, I'm going to just do a little bit of making this look a little nicer. So right up here we have screen 1 as the title. So I'm going to change the title to be the name of my app, which is Diabetes Helper. And then if you look up here, you can see Diabetes Helper shows up. Another thing is that you can change the theme down here. So if I say device default, you see that now Diabetes Helper shows up a little bit bigger and you get the 3 dots. So it's a little bit upgraded as to, looks a little more modern. There are a couple of other options, black tile. So, you know, you can play with these, but just looks a bit better than the classic. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to add in 5 buttons for the 5 features. I'm going to add these in inside of an arrangement. So a vertical arrangement allows us to group things together. And I'm really doing this for formatting. So I've got a vertical arrangement. Note that it popped in the middle, and that's because on my screen 1, I made my align horizontal centered and my align vertical centered here. Okay, so that's why this is centered. Then I'm going to go back to my user interface and I'm going to drop in 5 buttons. Nope, that. I'm having trouble dragging, but okay, we'll drag in 5 buttons. Okay, and each of these buttons is going to take the user to my given feature. So we decided the first one that we're going to work on is medical information. So the other thing I want to do is rename these. So I'm going to call this medical info button. Okay, and also I'm going to change the text to, let's say, information about diabetes. So here is it completed. What I've done is I've renamed my 5 buttons appropriately for their function, and then I've also changed their text to be labeled appropriately, again, for their function. So the reason I put this in a vertical arrangement originally was for the formatting, and so what I want to really do is make these the same width. So an easy way to do this within a vertical arrangement is go through and change each of their widths to fill parent. And if I do that, they will all have the same width. Okay, so that gives a little uniformity to it. The other thing I'm going to do is just to make them stand out a bit is to change their colors. I'm just choosing random colors, but this at least will give us a little bit of differentiation between them. So now we have that. Now what I'm going to do is we're only going to focus on this first one, our medical info button at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the other buttons invisible by checking the visibility button on each of the properties. And who knows, we may never even get to those features, so we're just going to focus on this now. I'm ready to start working on my first feature, medical info. Before I begin that, what I'm going to do now is checkpoint my file. So under my projects, I can say checkpoint. And what this allows you to do is to save your project at certain checkpoints or states, so that if something bad were to happen, I can always go back to a kind of a good copy. So I'm going to just call this screen 1. We're now going to implement the first feature of our app, and this will be the medical information feature, where we will give some general information about diabetes, and then give some different topics around diabetes, and we're going to send our users out to some websites with information. We're going to do this through the use of a second screen. I am going to warn you that we do not recommend many screens in App Inventor. In our case, we've got 5 features, so I think we can add these features to our app in separate screens. But generally, we recommend that you have no more than 10 screens in an app. If you have too many screens, then that adds to the memory that app emitter takes up, and so the more memory, eventually your app's going to slow down and you'll run into problems. However, let's at least start with this as an additional screen. So I'm going to add a screen. I'm going to call it medical info screen. So we want to label it by what its function's going to be. And what happens is you get a new screen. So now I have two screens up here, screen one and medical info screen. And it takes me to my new screen, which doesn't have anything on it at this point. So we're now ready to start to build the screen. First thing I want to do is I want to change this header here so it doesn't say screen. So I'm just going to say information about diabetes for the title of the screen, and that helps our user. Now, we previously had sketched out what the screen looks like in our paper prototype, so we're going to try to follow that. So what we want is at the top, we want some general information about diabetes, and then we want buttons where the user can find out more information on particular topics. So I'm going to drag out a label, another label, and for our buttons, I'm going to drag out a table arrangement. So table arrangement lets you set up a table, and I want a 2x2. So over here, table arrangement, we have 2 columns and 2 rows, which is perfect. That's just what we want. We're going to have 4 buttons. So I'm going to set the width to fill the parent. And then within that, I want to drag out some buttons. So I'm going to drag out a button. Now notice that it kind of highlights these boxes. So those are the 2x2. So we've got this, second one, third one, fourth one. Okay, so now these don't look that great. So what we want to do is let's set the width of each of these buttons to be half the width of the parent because we want it to fill half the screen. So I'm going to say 50%. Okay, and then we want to label them to match what their the topics are. So we've decided on 4 topics, and I'm going to not only label them with text, but I'm also going to label the button or rename the button. So the first button is going to be to talk about symptoms. So I'm going to make this symptoms button. Second button, eating healthy. So I will rename this eating healthy button. Third button, prevention. And fourth button, to talk about the different types of diabetes. So type 1 and type 2. Oh, that's right. We're doing the name. So let's call this the types button. Okay, and I'll go back and change the text for each of these. So symptoms, this is what the user is going to see. Eating healthy, prevention, and this is where I would type 1 and type 2. What I'm also going to do is I'm just going to change the background color to make these stand out a little bit, look a little bit better. Again, you can play with the actual layout as to how you want it to look, but I'm going to make them all the same color. Now we want to just deal with these 2 labels. So this is where the general information about diabetes is going to go. So I'm going to rename these labels just because I'm going to add some more labels down below and I just don't want to confuse them. So I'm going to call this the general info, let's call it header. And then this one is actually going to hold the general info, so I'll call it general info. Okay, and top one, I actually want the text to say general information. I want this to be a header, so I'm going to make this say 24. Whoa, too big, 24, and maybe make it bold. And perhaps I want to make our screen centered, so everything's centered. So in this label is where I want to put some general information about diabetes. So I've done some research about diabetes. I looked at different websites. I found this nice website from the NIH, and I think this particular couple of paragraphs would be useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back to App Inventor, and for the text, for the general information, I'm going to paste that in. Now, if I click, it looks okay. Now you can make this bigger to actually see the full text. Now, this doesn't look too great, so what I want to do is do a little bit of formatting by making a margin. So what I can do is with the label, make the width only, let's say 90% of the width. And because we have centered everything, it should put margins on both sides. Now at this point, it looks like our buttons are overwriting or on top of the label, but in actuality, when you run it, and we can actually do that now. So I'm going to connect to the emulator to kind of show you what it would look like. So when we run it, you can see that the label will fully fill in, and it's nicely formatted. Now the other thing that we want to do is to give some credit for where we're getting this information. So I'm going to go back to my NIH website, and I'm going to just copy the address and go back here to my text, and I'm going to paste that in. Note that it does try to wrap things, so I'm going to put the word from. So now you see, oh, from went back up there. To ensure that everything's on the next line, there's a thing called \n, and I'm going to put 2 in. And so if we now look back at the emulator, it put basically a line feed here and a line feed here. So \n is a computer's way of saying go to the next line. So now we can at least give some credit here. So the way that we want the 4 buttons to work is when the user presses a button, it's going to go out to a website and display the information from that website on the particular topic. So for that, we're going to need a web viewer component. So under the user interface, web viewer, we can drag it over, and you get this globe or world that signifies it's the web viewer component. Now, what's going to happen is only half of the screen is going to show up. So we've got this real estate up above from the labels and the buttons. So what we want to do is we want to give the full screen. Now we could use a separate screen here, but this is where we could consolidate things into a single screen, and so I'm going to show you how to do that. So if we go back to our layout and drag in a vertical arrangement. So I'm going to drag that in at the top. And this is going to be our main arrangement where the majority of our stuff appears. So I'm going to rename this main arrangement. And inside of that, and I'm going to make that the width of the parent, and I'm going to start to drag all of our existing. Now this could be tough. We want to get the whole arrangement in there. And that works. So inside of main arrangement, we've moved the 2 labels and then the table arrangement. And then web viewer is underneath that arrangement. What I want to happen though is when the user has viewed what they want, I want them to be able to go back to the general information and the 4 buttons. So what we're going to do is I'm going to drag in another vertical arrangement. So I'm going to try to get that below the first one. And I'm going to call this the web viewer arrangement. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the web viewer inside of that. And now, of course, we want that also be to width fill parent. And let's do height fill parent as well. And let's do that for this one. Fill parent, fill parent. Now, both of them will try to fill the parent, but because both of them are there at this point, they're going to each take up half of it. So what we're going to do though is when the user presses a button, we're going to hide this top main arrangement and show this bottom web viewer arrangement. And then we're going to add a button. So inside of the bottom arrangement, I'm going to rename this, call this back button. And we can put the text to say back to information. And if we want, we can, set this as centered so it's in the center. And we might want to change the background color. So let's call this green or something. Okay, so now we've got the setup, and let's actually do the coding now. So what we're going to do is go up here to the blocks editor. So we're in the designer currently, over to the blocks editor. And this is where we're going to code the behavior of the buttons. So let's just start with the first one, which is the symptoms button. So we're going to click on that, and we want to drag out a when symptoms button dot click. So what do we want to happen when the user clicks this button? We want to open up a website about symptoms of diabetes. So I've identified on that same site a page about symptoms. So this is the website that I want. So I'm going to copy that. And what I'm going to do then is go to Web Viewer, and we can pull out this call Web Viewer go to URL. So this is going to go to a particular URL that we specify. So we can specify that with a text block, snap that in, and I'm going to paste in the website that I've identified that I want it to go to. So what do we want to do? We want to hide the main arrangement, and we want to show the web viewer arrangement. So what we can do is go to the main arrangement, click on it, and we want to set main arrangement visible. And under logic, we want this to be false. So if its visibility is false, it's hidden. And then what we can do here is right click and duplicate this. And web viewer arrangement, because they're both vertical arrangements, we can duplicate their blocks and just change things, and we want this to be true. Okay, so it's going to hide the top one and show the bottom one. One thing we have to account for is how our arrangements appear when we first start. So going back to the designer, we actually want main arrangement to be visible, web viewer arrangement to be invisible to start. Under the medical info screen, so that's the screen component, I want to make sure when it's initialized, so when medical info screen initialized, and I'm going to copy these two, and I want to make sure this is true, and I'm going to make sure that's false. So that means anytime we open up the screen, this is the state we want it in. Main arrangement visible, web viewer arrangement invisible. The one thing I need to do now is to tie this screen back to screen 1. So I'm going to go back to screen 1 now, and we want to code this button so that it will open the second screen. So I'm going to go up here to the blocks editor, and I'm going to say when, so I'm going to click on medical info button. When that's clicked, I want to open another screen. So you go up to the control blocks, and if we go down here, and we want to open another screen, and we can pull in a text block, and we want to make sure that we get the spelling of the screen correct. So it's medical info screen capitalized. So that should open that screen. Let's go ahead and test this out with our emulator. So I'm in screen 1, I'm pressing the button, it jumps to screen 2, now I'm going to press the symptoms, and it takes a minute, but eventually it will come to this website. So now I can go to the website. Now I want to be able to go back to the information. So what I want to do now is go to my back button, and when back button click, basically I just want to reverse this and do the same as here. So I'm going to duplicate and duplicate. Okay, so let's check that again. So if I say back to information, yep, and then, okay, so that works. So now that we've got our first button working, what we can do is code the other 3 buttons very easily. It's going to be exactly the same as this one. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this. So everything's the same. Notice now we have this red X. That means because there's a duplicate, it's an error. So if you click on it, this is duplicate event handler. So what we can do though is change this to eating healthy. Okay, so everything is going to be the same except this, right? So I've actually identified my website for eating healthy. So I'm going to copy that and go back to App Inventor. And so I just need to change the website. So what I can do now is go back by checking with the emulator, and we've got symptoms, symptoms, and we can go to eating healthy. And yep, it took a few seconds, but it did come up. And now I'm just going to quickly code the last two. So I'll duplicate this again, and this will be my third button, prevention. And I've got my preventing website, which I'll copy and here, and let's duplicate that and get our final one, which is types. And I've got a website up here to identify the two types. Copy that, paste. And now this is getting a little messy, so there's a couple of things you can do. Cleanup blocks is the one that I like. It will just put everything in a nice, clean, vertical line. You can also, sort blocks by category. You can say arrange blocks vertically, which is essentially the same as what I have. Arrange blocks horizontally will do that. So just to clean up once you get a few blocks in there, I find it helps to visually be able to see it all together. Now the last thing we need for this app is a way to get back to screen one. It's always good practice to put back buttons. This back button just gets us back to the main arrangement, but we want to get back to the main screen. So I'm going to drag in another button. It often takes a bit of playing around with the different components to try to fit buttons within arrangements. So we're going to play around a bit here. And I'm going to try to get it into that main arrangement. And it looks like it's not part of it, but there is a way to see if it is. So I'm going to make this invisible. And the fact that it's still showing up means that it's not inside the main arrangement. So now what I want to do is I'm going to try to get this one invisible and see now if I can drag it in there. Okay, so I think that will work. So let's go back and make this visible again so we can. Okay, and I think we've done it. So you can see that making different arrangements visible or invisible helps you to be able to locate things and place things. It takes a little bit of finesse. So button one, we're going to call this home button. And because I want it to, so let's, just so we can see it, let's make this invisible again. So I've got text for button one. And now I've also noticed that when I put everything inside main arrangement, I did not center that. So let's center that so that everything's in the middle. And it looks better. So here's our home button. I'm going to erase the text. Instead of text for this, I'm going to add an icon. So we have the image property, and I've previously uploaded a little home icon, so that's what's going to be my image. Okay, so now we've got the home icon, and the button is filling the same size as the image, so let's make that a little smaller. So let's change the width and height of the home button, and I'm going to choose it to be 50 pixels. So that should be small enough so that it's viewable, but it doesn't take up a lot of space. So this button is only going to appear in the main arrangement. When the web viewer arrangement is visible, it won't show. So what we need now to do is to go back to the blocks editor and to code it. So we're going to go to home button, and when home button is clicked, and what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the control menu, and we want to just do a close screen. Now, a lot of people will just say, oh, I'm going to go open another screen and open screen one. You don't want to do this because what happens in App Inventor is each time you open a screen, it basically opens the screen on top of whatever screen is currently opened. When you close a screen, it just removes that screen, and whatever called that screen or opened that screen will be underneath it. So this will return us back to screen 1. What we can do now is test this out with the emulator. It's always a good idea when you're testing to start from screen 1. So set up screen 1, let's open the emulator, and we'll press the button. We come here to our second screen. Let's try out one of these buttons to make sure. Okay, back to information, and now we can use the home button, and it comes back to home. And now we can easily go back and forth between the two screens. So we've got that feature done. Excellent. We can congratulate ourselves before we move on to our second feature.